Hello, everyone. Good morning. So I'm Clarisse, CEO of DFNS. DFNS is a cybersecurity company. We provide Web3 infrastructure or Web3 wallet infrastructure. We are an API-first company providing key management services, enabling secure and programmatic access to basically every blockchain. And so at DFNS, we're obsessed with the idea that our clients, our organization, should not need to trust us. They should just use us, and it should be easy for them to understand how we work and not to have to do a leap of faith to use us. So we decided to look a bit at the history and how people had been managing their assets before, how they've been securing their assets and entrusting assets over the years. Yeah, it works. So the first banking system we actually find in history come from Sumeria. It's 4,000 years before Christ. And basically over there, the merchants were the trusted institution that offered the first loans. It was actually grain loans, collateralized, in a barter system. So people would exchange commodity and collateralize that with grain loans. Because of corruption, because of conflict of interest, this system collapsed. But before collapsing, the king Hammurabi put in place the Hammurabi law to try to regulate it. It's very interesting. It's actually, I think, one of the first attempts to regulate banking system. And there's a law, the law 122, that basically asked for depositor to go see notary with all the assets they wanted to actually give in collateral to those merchants to receive loans. And only then would there be actually granted the fact that they did deposit these assets with bankers. So 2,000 years before Christ, we used a notary system, that means a third party, to make sure that people could be trusted. So there was already the need to look at decentralizing trust. Fast forward a few thousand centuries later, so in the Renaissance, the church tried to actually be the bank to the people, and it started early in the Renaissance in Italy. The church found actually a loophole and managed to bypass the ban on usury, and they actually started giving loans to poor people, and the loophole was that they couldn't charge any interest rate. And with that, they were actually paid in delays of payments, they were paid in insurance on the loans. So people started receiving loans from church that were basically backed by the gracious donations from Christians. And this is how that system worked. It worked until preachers in Florence started corrupting the system, wanted to gather more resources. They actually called a palm day to encourage people to even give more offering to sustain their banking setup. So it worked until it collapsed because the system became corrupted and the trusted party take advantage of the resources they had in management. Then, fast forward, about the same time, actually, about a few centuries later. Monarchies tried as well to control the banking system. And for instance, in the 17th century, in Sweden, the central bank was actually created in 1668. And at that time, the king had entrusted the founder of Banco of Stockholm, to manage the depository banks for the state. And so the king had entrusted Johan Palmhirsch to actually completely manage how the banking system should work in Sweden with that central bank. What happened is that it issued too much notes, which were not enough collateralized. All that sounds so familiar. Too many notes, not collateralized, and so the banking system collapsed. And so poor Johan Palmhirsch was condemned to death, even though it was the king that completely managed in his name that bank. Later, he was granted clemency. But what happened then is that the authority went from the king to the parliament, decentralizing trust. In 19th century, we see the really first view of the banking system as we know it today, right? So in France, in 1888, under the empire of Napoleon, was created the first bank, as we know it, the deposit bank, called Caisse d'Épargne. It's actually still active. It even has the same logo. So the Caisse d'Épargne was launched in 1888 to actually help people build savings and manage the savings. Until then, there's actually a sentence that still exists in France. We used to say that you caché dans des bas de laine, which means you put your money into your socks, dirty socks, to avoid thieves from actually taking them away from you should, someone rob your house. So thanks to the Caisse d'Épargne, people no longer had to hide their savings into their socks. It was the first bank that was really accessible to everyone, not just to rich people, not just to merchants, not just to Christians, but to everyone. At the same time, Napoleon had built actually strong infrastructure that still held, and one of them is building a network of notary to be able to control what institutions were doing, to be able to control private enterprise, right? And so something that was asked to the Caisse d'Épargne when they launched was to actually build what we called livret, which is really small ledger. And in these ledgers, you would report, I deposited this amount of money, and you would see all the records of the transaction in these small ledgers, right? And so those ledgers were the guarantee for people, should something go wrong with the bank, they could go see notary and see, hey, this is what happened, this was my money, I didn't get it. So that's use of a tool, using something to actually help you build trust, using a device to be able to claim your position was actually one of the first time in history in modern banking that happened. Then industrialization happened in 19th century. With industrialization, modern banking happened. And with that, the need to build welfare state happens. In order to build a welfare state, you need to collect tax. Collecting tax became something that was even more important with the wars, World War I and World War II. So there's a set of several acts in the US, for instance, in 1926, in 1942, that increased taxes. And with the need to increase taxes and collect fast taxes, the United States started appointing the employers as the tax collector. So the employers became the custodian of money, of the wages that people needed to give to the state in order to pay their tax. It's the first time in history employer actually had a political role of collecting tax. And so that went well. The state was actually able to collect faster taxes, to collect more taxes. So welfare state was built thanks to this employer taking this political role, becoming the custodians for the state of the tax money. And in 1961, President Kennedy actually made a law on pensions demanding that employer build more pensions for the employee and appointed employer to collect the pension money. So not only now employer were collecting taxes on wages, they were also collecting the pensions. 2 years later, maybe you're familiar with the Studebaker auto manufacturer. It was one of the biggest manufacturers at the time. And 2 years later, it went into financial difficulties. In order to maintain its business, it used pensions money, and it bankrupt. And with this bankruptcy, 7,000 of people lost their pensions. So employers failed at being custodians for the employees, for people, of their actual savings and money. It took about 10 years for the United States to actually build new law around custody, and in 1974, President Ford put in place the ERISA Act that basically decentralized custody to custody banks. So employers had to entrust trustee custody bank with the pension money. They could no longer build pension plan in their treasury, in their corporate treasury. They had to appoint trusted banker. And that's really when our whole financial system as we know it was actually born, developed, grew until, hey, I skipped that one. Grew until something far too familiar happened in 2008. Regulation being close to custody bank became favorable in the 1990s, and the 2000s enabled them to increase their leverage with risky investment. That led to 2008 financial crisis, and we know it too well. That led to $14 trillion worth of wealth being lost. That led to actually people losing their money, people losing their home, people losing their jobs. And that led to actually the white paper of Bitcoin being launched in 2008. That same year, the need and the willingness to build a decentralized monetary system so we do not need to trust trusted parties anymore. Then, I'm sorry, it doesn't work well. Well, I guess we won't see the slide. Here you go. Yeah. Then decentralization. Thank you. Decentralization was born, but because it was far too complex to interact with blockchain technology directly, decentralization was operated by centralized entities, by centralized exchange, by centralized trading platform, and that led to mismanagement, to hacks that casted a lot of distrust in the industry, and to the failure of building a decentralized system as Satoshi had envisioned it to start with. Right. So we think that it's very interesting to look at this history, because what it shows is that we've always tried to actually build decentralized trust. We've seen that decentralized custody, I'm really not managing to do that well, I'm sorry. All right, can someone help me? Yes, too much. Here we go. So when we talk about decentralized custody, spoiler, decentralized custody protocol doesn't exist today. Spoiler 2, when we talk about decentralized custody, there's a regulatory component that we have all no impact on, right? There's no way we can actually know whether the regulators will prone or not a decentralized system to actually custody funds. But what we know is that actually through technology, we can try to start building a decentralized key management services that will help you to actually store in a decentralized way your assets. At Defense, we work a lot on that, and we work, and our research team is really dedicated on this point. And today, we don't have the solution yet, but we know what are the properties that you must look at when thinking about decentralized custody or when looking at providers that actually want to sell decentralized custody. All right, so security properties. There should be no single point of failure, first and foremost, with very high fault tolerance and very high attack tolerance. In order to provide this security, there should be high geographic distribution to increase continuity and to make sure that people can keep on using the centralized custody system. In terms of incentive, a strong incentive should be put in people operating decentralized custody to maintain efficiency in the setup. So it goes through a strong token economics, but it goes also with the fact that you need entropic signer implementation to avoid the possibility of parties to collude. This is a very important point. There will be no decentralized custody if we're not able to actually meet the use cases that need efficiency in terms of signing speed, in terms of volume of transaction, right? So the scalability of the key recovery mechanism is very important, but also the segregation of public-private key pair to make sure that even in a decentralized custody, people cannot commingle funds. These are a set of properties that we think are completely mandatory in order to build decentralized custody. What history has shown us is that people have been trying for years to try to build a system that will prevent it meaning corruption, it meaning commingling of funds to lose their money, and that would prevent themselves, meaning loss, meaning being robbed, to lose their assets. So the ideal decentralized custody system relies on a technology that is able to achieve both in order to guarantee that organizations never have to actually do a leap of faith to entrust their assets. Thank you very much.